Yeah,
Yeah,
right now
definitely.
we're
Yeah.
live, by the way. So, hello, everybody. So, yeah, we are here today for Please Forward, our artist salon. I'm so honored to have these artists with us today. My name is Lisa Radon, and Eleanor Ford is my co-host. And we're using Eleanor's Zoom today, so we don't have our free 40-minute time limit. So we're just gonna go off. It's gonna be great.
Yeah.
And Flint is modding the chat. Thank you, Flint. And just quickly, if I would love it if you guys could introduce yourselves better than I could. We have today with us Chloe Alexandra Thompson, who's in New York, Brigitte Nicole Grice, splits time between LA and London, and Zoë Marden, who is in London. If we could start with you, Bridget, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Brigitte Nicole Grice. I'm an artist, philosopher, and writer. Currently working on a PhD at the University of Essex on international surrealism and how it really corresponds to our contemporary times. So I've been working on a documentary for the last 6 years. And my practice ranges from painting, sculpture, dance performance, writing, fiction, poetry, to just kind of gesture.
Amazing.
um,
And
yeah, thanks
Chloe,
for
can you
having me.
introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Chloe, and I just relocated to New York from Portland, Oregon. And I am an artist working with sound primarily right now. I've also, over the years, curated and run project spaces and done a lot of work around essentially like art and how it applies to people coming together and having these like joint ephemeral experiences. And that's really my point of interest in a very small amount of words. So yeah, I work with audio programming and focus on spatial audio and yeah, collaborate with other artists as a sound designer as well.
Great. And hi, Zoe. Can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Zoe. I grew up in Hong Kong and I moved to London about, I think it was 7 years ago. And I suppose my practice kind of splits somewhere between kind of the curatorial and performance. And I don't know, I don't really know how it all fits together, but at the moment, performance is definitely at the forefront. I also work quite collaboratively. I used to run a project space in Barcelona before I moved here. I do a lot of curating here as well. I run a project called Campervan, where we curate queer performances out of a campervan. I've been doing that for a couple of years. And I suppose my own practice is quite research focused. So I have a kind of like research strand, and then the work comes out of that. And at the moment, it's mermaids and amphibious creatures.
Amazing. Eleanor, do you want to introduce yourself really quickly?
Yeah. I'm Eleanor Ford. I live in Chicago, and I am a art history dropout turned researcher and theoretical artist. My work, like mostly at this point, focuses on on minerals and landscapes and radiation and the histories of nuclear testing in the desert Southwest. So,
Cool. The first thing I'm going to show some work. We're going to show a little bit of work as sort of points of entry of ways of talking about folks' experience, folks' practices. And I just wanted to say also for viewers in the chat, if you want to add questions, say hi, links, etc., please do that. And we're glad you're here with us. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to show Zoe a piece of yours, little Loting. I'm going to show a little bit of the documentation, and then I'm going to show part of the video work.
audio's working.
You don't think you can't hear it?
No.
Is it maybe music on?
Friction is forgotten
Ah, there
at the
it is.
speed of
Just quite
thought,
soft.
buried in the depths of the shadows. Where shapes have no firm outline that creep through the cracks of our memories, only to be lost in the expanse of time. The pull of the sun's rays, so effortless in her tug, drawing us towards her sweaty embrace, as the weight of gravity tightens its grip. A sacrifice we have all made, a coaxing siren song that sweetly sang, luring death on the rocks. A lilting voice is silenced to a croak. Our beautiful monstrosity reduced to a prop for a desire to be consumed by the other. Streamlined fins morph into tendons and bones, made for earth and rock, for standing, for running, for weaving their way in between the maze of buildings. Our lion rock spirit seeps through the cracks of the pavements. Its presence hangs in the air with the smell of melting concrete. Heels like talons puncture a path through the tarmac. Tentacles inch their way slowly, painfully through the sealed shut.
Zoe, I was hoping that that you could tell us. I mean, there's two things, not two, but like a couple things of interest here. Like primarily, like the what you're talking about like the monstrous feminine and the and mermaids and thinking of mer creatures as a way of thinking through things. But I'm also really curious about the way that the video and how that lives and moves through the world versus like the performance and how they're like things that are overlapping. And so any way you want to come at that would be great. But if you could just tell us a little bit more about the project.
That project was that kind of manifested in many different ways, and I think that the work tends to do that. So it kind of starts with a kind of a research question. So I started looking into this mythological creature called the Loting, which was used by a curator in Hong Kong in 1997 to kind of talk about the handover. And it was this idea, I think it was like the idea of using a mythology as a way to create other mythologies, and it became this kind of legacy in the art world in Hong Kong, with artists responding to this myth in different ways to talk about kind of politics and basically kind of a way to talk about the kind of colonial history of Hong Kong. So that was kind of the beginning of it, and it expanded into the video work which we just saw, and I shot most of the footage in Hong Kong, and then it also became a performance piece that I did in collaboration with my sister that ended up being the final degree show at the Royal College of Art. So it kind of had many different stages and kind of shifted depending on what context it was taking place in. So like Sometimes it was a sound piece, sometimes it was just the video, other times it was an installation in which a performance kind of happened within. And it kind of became a jumping off point for other kinds of conversations and other types of projects. And I think that that was like the beginning, and then from there I went on into kind of other types of mermaid mythologies, and then from there I went into The Little Mermaid and Disney and tentacles. So it kind of happened quite organically. And in the kind of like fluidity of the way that it worked, I kind of just allowed the research to take me where it needed to go, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I'm gonna show this other project also, the Mermaids, Tentacles, and Other Stories. This is a little bit of documentation of this project. The link is in the chat if you want to follow up and look at it. But yeah, that's so interesting about, like, you know, like rhizomatically letting research take you where it wants to take you and following through on it, but also just the idea of like Haraway having a lot to say about what's happening right now. Do you want to tell us a little bit more about how this project, did you say this is the degree show, or this is?
That was part of the degree show, which was in 2018. And then from there, I suppose the form kind of shifted and changed over the past 2 years, and the performances kind of went in different directions. And I suppose the most recent kind of form that I'm working in is a lecture performance, which I think makes a lot of sense, because I used to work with like collaging, and I think my work tends to be quite about like layering. So the kind of lecture performance ended up being a collation of all of the research that I've been doing. So like clips of videos that I've made, videos that I've found, text, kind of overlapping each other, kind of creating almost like a symphony of sound and image. And I feel at this point it kind of brings together a lot of the elements that I felt weren't quite working previously. So I feel like this is a direction that I'm kind of working towards at the moment.
So you're still working, it's still like iterating.
Yeah, I mean, I've done 2 lecture performances over the past couple of months, and they take quite a long time to get done, because it's just quite a complicated thing coordinating videos. And I tried to sing as well, and I'm not really a singer, I just like sing because I thought it would be quite fun. And then overlap the videos and then speak and look what's happening behind. So it takes quite a lot of rehearsing. But yeah.
And so can you talk a little bit about what you're saying about like what how you're thinking about the monstrous feminine, and how the mermaid is like in a way of thinking through that?
Yeah, so I suppose the research began with this theorist called Rosie Braidotti, who wrote a lot about the monstrous feminine and this idea of teratology, which is the study of monsters. And so the mermaid kind of comes under that realm. And I was quite fascinated with the way that the mythologies of mermaids are very kind of gendered and very, I suppose, the first mermaid you can think of is like Homer's Odyssey, with the mermaids who are luring the soldiers to death on the rocks. So there's this kind of duality of like the hypersexual creature, but yet at the same time violence and death. And I was quite, it was that kind of dichotomy that really drew me into thinking more about it. And I suppose within Disney's Little Mermaid, which was kind of the jumping off point for the Ursula's tentacles piece. I was looking at the kind of stereotype that Ariel and Ursula kind of conform to, in terms of Ursula being this kind of larger than life, kind of evil, supposedly evil character, and Ariel, who was kind of childlike and vulnerable, and there was kind of no in between, and that was what I was really interested in, kind of like digging into these ideas. And then I discovered that Ursula was based on divine.
I didn't know that until I looked at the piece. I was like, oh my gosh, that's so great.
Yeah, and then I'm totally obsessed with divine.
Like divine.
The Divine, the drag queen from John Waters' film Pink. Yeah.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, as soon as you know, you're like, yeah, it makes total sense. Yeah, so I was really interested in this kind of like performance of gender, and then I suppose in quite an obvious way, the tentacles really just drew me into kind of the actual metaphor of the tentacles, and then looking at Donna Haraway and her kind of thinking around tentacularity. And then this idea of like kind of liquid bodies, and how Ursula kind of takes up this space as a figure in her kind of abundance of flesh, and how her tentacles kind of reach out, and in Donna Haraway's kind of understanding, bringing together like the multitude and kind of breaking down hierarchies in terms of kind of working collectively. So in some ways I kind of like the idea of like the superimposition of her ideas with this quite dramatic figure that Ursula is, I suppose.
Right. I mean, but it also goes back to what you're saying about mermaids previously. You were saying death, but it's more like threat, like threat to patriarchy, and it's like kind of a cool. I mean, what I love is like that idea of like that the tentacular, like bringing in as a threat, but not a threat to us, but like a threat to like this, an established order. Yeah. I want to. So I'm going to show Brigitte. I'm going to show a little bit of your project, because what I think is that we'll sort of introduce these projects and then they'll end up talking with, like, speaking to each other. So I'm going to show a little bit of, let me see here. What do I do? Okay, here we go.
So there's the website, but then there's also a link that the website can be activated, I guess, is what I'm...
Well, I was going to play this video. Is that okay?
Yeah, the Freud track one.
Yeah, I'm going to do that.
Perfect.
I hope. I'm trying, but let's see here. Maybe I have too many things open.
Wait, now where is... Okay.
Hold on, I'm going to refresh this page. Technology, come on. So this is, how do you pronounce it? Das Bureau des Surrealismus?
Das Bureau des Surrealismus.
Okay.
Das ist richtig.
Yeah, I can. Oh, wait, here we go. Duh. I was like trying to click on the image. Okay, now we're playing I'm going to play the video for a minute here.
Dreams by Sigmund Freud. This book is read by Jonathan Rhys. This recording of the full-length reading of Dreams was produced in 1996 by Joss Recordings, which holds the copyright thereto. This recording, nor any parts thereof, may be reproduced or used for any purpose without prior written authority from Joss Recordings. Sigmund Freud's basic work of dream interpretation was divided into a series of lectures that were given by him at the University of Vienna in 1915 and 1916. One must first learn two fundamentals. One, that psychic processes are inherently unconscious. Those which are conscious are isolated acts and part of the total psychic process. Two, instinctive impulses, particularly the sexual, in either the narrower or the broader sense of the term, play a major role in determining our psychic life. Errors are caused by the influence of unconscious psychic processes. For example, an engineer damaged some equipment which he knew full well how to use and which he was testing in preparation for a lecture the following day. He later admitted that he disliked the thought of giving the lecture, and the strength of this dislike had caused the confusion that led him to turn a valve in the wrong direction, although as a conscientious man he intended to deliver the lecture. Slips of the tongue such as, "Let us roast our esteemed colleague" instead of "Let us toast our esteemed colleague," are the result of failure to suppress the word one unconsciously wishes to say. The same is true of slips such as saying, "He is a grave man," when one had begun to say good and then in mid-word felt impelled to change the adjective to brave.
Dream.
So do you want to tell us a little bit? I mean, I love this, and I love that you said about it that, I mean, I'm just super curious about like how thinking through surrealism, like what that's like in 2020, but also I loved kind of the way that you framed this. So maybe you could just talk about the way that you framed the project.
Let me see. So sorry, it wouldn't play when I did it, and I just haven't seen the video in a while. But I guess for me, the project first comes out of life. I think that is kind of the most important aspect of surrealism is living. And from that, we can go from there. But it came from me. I was kind of framing it. I was coming from Cal Arts. I was working at Cal Arts in the art school. I just finished a master's. I did a master's thesis called Contempt, Le Mépris, which was really looking at what is a spirit in contemporary art and what can art do in late form of capitalism. That made me kind of in a trajectory of looking at early Marx, 1844, the economic and philosophical manuscripts, going into Adorno's idea of the culture industry, and then coming out with going through to Marcuse, where he kind of feels that art, simply saying it very simply, is kind of can still go through a system. So it might be reified, it might be co-opted, however that art that's existing in that bank, say. So for example, I still back and forth live in Los Angeles, but I used to live downtown in Skid Row and worked at the bookstore at Hauser and Wirth. And so every day I would do this commute of staying in my studio, walking through Skid Row to go to the Arts District, and then walking back to go to the YMCA gym to shower and to exercise, but really to shower and bathe myself every day. And I would walk through Bank of America, and there's this Moreau sculpture. And these sculptures he did in, I believe it's a series that he did in '68, and they're incredible sculptures. And every time I looked at it, and there's a Louise Nevelson up there, and there's just like this amazing public sculpture art. Some of it's inside banks, some of it's just in public space. And I would always just have this thought of like, no one really knows the sculpture is here. Like, do these people, these bankers, go into this building, and do they go, "Hi, Moreau," every morning? And it kind of made me, my thesis kind of led me down this question of, okay, what still is the possibilities of art? And it within a capitalist system, and that trajectory, I think, is an ongoing question that I'll continue to have probably through the rest of my life, but hopefully those systems will change soon. Considering what's going on in the world right now. And from that, I kind of came to, okay, art is important, and then what kind of art actually can make some type of shift. And I always had this kind of infatuation, objective hazard, so objective chance, love, fascination. I've always had these kind of chance experiences since I was a little girl to surrealism. And it kind of was like, it kind of just like aligned. And I was like, oh, I've been working on this project. I started meeting people, started part of the Chicago Surrealist. Some of them are still active in Chicago. Eleanor, and became, yeah, and just started meeting people and having conversations that led me to do this bureau. And the bureau was a bureau set up in 1924. It was set up before even the manifesto was released, so the first manifesto in 1924. And it was really kind of like the headquarters of surrealism. It was kind of like, okay, let's have a centralized bureau. We want to get this in, what we're doing is radical, and we want to think about it in terms of the public. The idea of the public was very complicated at that time still, as I think today our public is still very complex. And from what they were setting up, Breton, Pierre Neville, Aragon, Ouliard, and others, their partners too, which are very important and largely neglected still historically. But in this, I was like, okay, can we have like, what was so precedent and so significant in surrealism was friendships, understanding of love, really a commitment to revolution. You know, they didn't know entirely what that revolution was, and there's a very complicated history that I don't have time to go into right now around what is a surrealist revolution, but really it